The June sun poured its warmth over the quiet town of Crestwood, a place where flags waved gently from porches and families gathered for moments of pride. At Crestwood High, rows of folding chairs lined the football field, already filled with proud parents, grandparents, and siblings waiting to witness a milestone: graduation day. James Carter smoothed the wrinkles from his faded Marine Corps dress jacket. It wasn't new, it wasn't shiny anymore, but it was his. He had earned it with blood, grit, and sacrifice in places far away from Crestwood. Today, though, it wasn't about him. It was about his boy. David Carter, his son, was set to walk the stage and claim the diploma he had fought for in his own way. James had always told him, "Earn it, son. Make every step count." And David had. He had worked jobs after school, studied late into the night, and made his father proud in every sense. The stands buzzed with chatter, camera shutters clicked, and the smell of popcorn and sunblock filled the air. James found a spot halfway up the bleachers. His ex-wife, Sarah, was already there, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They hadn't spoken much since the divorce, but today wasn't about old wounds. She glanced at him, gave a brief nod, and then focused back on the stage where their son's class lined up in neat rows of gowns and caps. For a moment, James let himself breathe. He thought of Fallujah, of long nights in desert sand, of brothers lost to war. He thought of why he fought, so his son could sit in classrooms without fear, so his boy could walk across this stage without burden. Pride swelled in his chest, but pride, as James knew, never lived long without a test. It happened suddenly, almost quietly. 2 security guards in black uniforms made their way up the bleachers. Their eyes scanned the crowd, sharp and suspicious. When they reached James, one of them leaned in, voice low but firm. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." James blinked, confused. "Excuse me?" The taller guard, a heavy-set man with a buzz cut, crossed his arms. "You don't belong in this section. This is reserved for family." James's jaw tightened. "I am family. That's my son up there, David Carter." He pointed toward the graduates waiting in line. The second guard, younger and more nervous, shifted uncomfortably. "Look, we don't want trouble. Just please step outside." Whispers spread through the surrounding seats. A couple nearby looked away, embarrassed for him. Sarah sat frozen, lips parted, tears forgotten. James could feel the eyes, the unspoken judgment. He had felt it before, on sidewalks, in stores, in neighborhoods where he wasn't welcome. But never here. Never on the day his son had earned his moment. His fists clenched against his knees, every muscle taut with the urge to stand, to fight, to shout his worth. But he swallowed hard. This wasn't about pride. This was about his boy. He would not ruin David's day with a scene. He rose slowly, shoulders squared, eyes burning with a mix of rage and restraint. His voice came steady, low, and controlled. "I bled for this country. I buried brothers for this country. And today, all I wanted was to see my son walk that stage." The taller guard scoffed. "Sir, outside, now!" And with that, James Carter, United States Marine, turned to leave the stands of his own son's graduation. But before he could take more than 2 steps down the aisle, a sound broke the air. Boots against metal bleachers, rising in rhythm. 6 men stood up, scattered across the crowd, moving as one. Their presence was unmistakable. Broad shoulders, sharp eyes, the quiet confidence of men who had seen battle. Each of them wore a pin or insignia, subtle but clear. United States Navy SEALs. The graduation field grew silent, cameras lowered, whispers hushed. They walked toward James, every step deliberate, and when they reached him, they stopped. Together, as if rehearsed, they raised their hands in perfect unison, 6 sharp salutes, held steady. And in that silence, the 2 guards realized what the entire crowd now knew. James Carter did not stand alone. The 6 salutes hung in the air like a command that needed no words. James felt his throat tighten. His boots seemed suddenly heavier, as though he were back in the desert heat, carrying not just his gear, but the memories of men who never made it home. The guards froze. The taller one tried to speak, but his voice faltered. The younger one took half a step back, his eyes darting from the SEALs to James, unsure of what to do. The crowd stayed hushed, waiting, watching. James lowered his gaze. He didn't want a scene, not here, not now. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, the memories came rushing back. Flashback. Iraq, 2004. The smell of dust and cordite. The staccato crack of rifle fire in the distance. James huddled in the ruins of a doorway, sweat dripping into his eyes. He was a sergeant then, tasked with leading a squad of young Marines through a hostile city. Beside him, Corporal Miller, a kid barely out of high school, trembled as he reloaded. James slapped his shoulder. "Breathe, son. 1 round at a time. We walk out together. Understand?" Miller nodded, his fear steadying into focus. That was James's gift. Calm in chaos, steadiness when the world burned. He had lost count of how many times he'd been the anchor for boys who needed a man to follow. But war always had a price. When the blast came, an IED buried in the road, James was thrown hard onto the asphalt. His ears rang, vision blurred, and when the dust cleared, Miller was gone. Pieces of his uniform, his rifle twisted, nothing more. James never forgot the look in Miller's eyes that day. The trust, the unspoken, "You'll get me home." But he couldn't. Not that time. Back in Crestwood, James blinked against the sting of tears. His son's graduation robe flashed in the corner of his vision, bright against the stage. That's why I fought. So he wouldn't have to live what I lived. The 6 SEALs lowered their salutes but stayed firm, like a wall of silent testimony. Someone in the crowd finally whispered, "He's a Marine." Another voice answered, "That's his son up there." The murmur spread, growing louder, rippling through the audience until it became a wave of recognition. James felt his knees weaken. Not from shame, but from the sheer weight of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a long while. Sarah, still seated, pressed her tissue against her lips, shoulders trembling. She had once loved him for that strength, that steady fire inside him. Somewhere along the years, between deployments and distance, that fire had burned too hot for their marriage. But today, she remembered why David looked up to his father like a hero. On stage, David Carter shifted uneasily in his row of graduates. He had caught glimpses of the commotion in the stands, had seen his father rise, had seen the guards corner him, his fists clenched beneath his gown. He wanted to run down, to tell the guards who James Carter was, what he meant. But he was trapped by ceremony, by protocol, by the eyes of hundreds watching. Memories flickered in his mind. Nights when Dad came home late, still in uniform, his hands trembling from whatever ghosts he carried, but his voice steady as he helped with algebra homework. Mornings when David didn't want to get up for school, and James would bark playfully, "Discipline, son! The world doesn't wait for the lazy!" and most of all, the day David told him he wanted to join the Navy. James's eyes had widened, then softened with pride and fear all at once. "You'll carve your own path, son," James had said, "but never forget, you stand on the shoulders of the men before you." Now, as David sat with his graduating class, he burned with anger at the injustice. His father wasn't just a man in the stands. He was the man, the one who had taught him every lesson that led him here. Back in the bleachers, the guards stood cornered, trapped not by fists but by the weight of silent honor. The taller guard swallowed hard. We didn't know." One of the SEALs finally spoke, his voice deep and measured. "Then maybe you should start paying attention to the kind of men you dismiss." The crowd shifted. Some nodded, some murmured agreement. A few even clapped softly before catching themselves. James said nothing. He simply looked at the stage, at his boy. This wasn't over. Not yet. He still hadn't decided whether to stay or leave, because deep down, even beneath the pride, was an ache. He had spent his whole life proving himself, to his unit, to his country, to his family. And still, even here, men in uniforms could look at him and see only someone who didn't belong. The principal's voice echoed through the loudspeaker. "And now, we begin the awarding of diplomas." The crowd cheered, the tension easing but not vanishing. James sank back onto the bleacher, his hands clasped tight together. He would stay. Not because the guards allowed it, not even because the SEALs had risen, but because David was about to take the most important walk of his young life. And James Carter was not going to miss it. The loudspeaker crackled, snapping everyone's attention back to the stage. The principal cleared his throat and began the roll call of names. One by one, the graduates crossed, shaking hands, collecting their diplomas, smiling for the camera flashes that rained down like stars. Families clapped, cheered, some even whistled. Pride radiated across the field. James sat rigid, shoulders squared, his jaw locked tight. His eyes never left the line of students in navy blue gowns. He searched until he found him, David, standing tall, chin lifted, waiting his turn. From where he sat, James could see the boy's hands flexing nervously at his sides. He knew that body language. He had worn it himself before battle. The quiet storm of a man holding back emotion. The memory of the guard's words still stung. "You don't belong." Those words had chased him for years, on different streets, in different towns. But never had they been thrown at him while wearing the jacket of a Marine, while sitting in a crowd meant to celebrate the next generation. He inhaled slowly, deeply. "Not today, James. This is David's day." The guards lingered awkwardly at the end of the bleacher row, arms folded, pretending authority they no longer owned. Every few seconds, their eyes flicked toward the SEALs, as if expecting them to sit down, to back away. But the 6 men didn't move. They stood with arms crossed, stone-faced, like statues carved from quiet defiance. The younger guard whispered something to his partner, but the taller one shook his head, his lips pressed thin. He knew the balance of power had shifted the moment those salutes were raised. The crowd felt it too. The bleachers seemed heavier with silence. Even the parents cheering their children spoke softer now, their eyes drawn back again and again to the Marine who had been told to leave. David adjusted his cap, his heart pounding. He had watched everything unfold in flashes. The guards cornering his father, the 6 SEALs rising, the hush that followed. He should have been thinking about his diploma, about the handshake with the principal, about tossing his cap into the air when it was all over. But all he could see was his father, standing tall, shoulders squared, surrounded by whispers. David's chest tightened. How many times has he swallowed this? How many times has he stood quiet, dignified, when the world tried to cut him down? The principal called another name. The line shifted forward. David's turn was drawing closer. He made a decision then. When his moment came, it wouldn't just be about him. James's hands trembled on his knees. He clenched them into fists, steadying himself. The ghosts of war didn't haunt him as much as the ghosts of silence. The moments when he had been treated as invisible, disposable. He remembered standing in a diner after coming home from deployment, his uniform dusty, his medals still fresh. The waitress had smiled at every other soldier in the room, but her smile had frozen when it landed on him. Service or not, she only saw the color of his skin. He had said nothing then. Just like today, he had swallowed it, not wanting to make a scene. But each swallowed slight added weight, and today it pressed heavy on his chest. His son's name was about to be called. Would this moment too be shadowed by injustice, or would it break the cycle? The principal's voice rang out across the field. "David Carter!" Applause rippled through the stands. Sarah shot to her feet, clapping through her tears. The SEALs nodded in unison, their gazes fixed on the young man in the gown. James rose halfway from his seat, his body moving before his mind caught up. Pride surged through him, raw, overwhelming, unstoppable. David stepped forward, his legs steady despite the storm inside him. He took the diploma, shook the principal's hand, then paused. He turned, not toward the photographer, but toward the stands. His eyes locked on his father. And in front of the entire crowd, David raised his right hand, not in a wave, not in a fist, but in a crisp, deliberate salute. The stands erupted in gasps. Cameras froze mid-click. The moment stretched, heavy and timeless. James's breath caught. His boy who had grown up on his shoulders, who had watched him leave for deployments, who had waited by the door for his return, was saluting him. The Marine in him reacted instinctively. His hand rose, sharp and true, returning the salute. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Father and son, bound by blood and sacrifice, saluted each other across the gulf of generations. Then the SEALs moved. All 6 raised their hands again, saluting father and son together. The crowd could not hold back. Applause thundered through the field. Parents, teachers, even students rose to their feet. The sound was deafening, not just for David, but for James, for the Marine who had been told he didn't belong. The guards slunk back, their authority crumbling under the weight of respect they had tried to deny. James lowered his hand, his chest heaving, eyes wet. For once, the tears didn't sting with shame. They burned with pride. The roar of applause carried across the football field, echoing beyond the bleachers and into the summer air. People stood shoulder to shoulder, clapping not just for David Carter, but for the Marine who had been told he didn't belong. James's chest swelled, but he didn't smile. His face remained solemn, steady, the way Marines do when they stand under fire. But inside, something shifted. Years of silence, of being overlooked, cracked open under the weight of recognition. David lowered his salute and stepped off the stage, diploma clutched in one hand. The crowd still clapped as he made his way back to his seat, but his eyes never left his father. He saw him, fully, as the man who had shaped his every step. The rest of the ceremony unfolded like background noise. Names were called, hands were shaken, Caps flew into the air. But all anyone could talk about was the moment, the salute that silenced whispers and replaced them with thunder. After the ceremony, parents swarmed the field, hugging their children, snapping photos. Teachers beamed with pride. But in the center of it all, a quiet space formed where James Carter stood waiting for his son. The 6 SEALs had not left his side. They lingered around him, not speaking much, just a steady presence, as if to say, "We've got you, brother." The taller guard shuffled past once, eyes down, his earlier arrogance stripped away. He didn't apologize. Men like him rarely did. But his silence was enough. For once, he was the one who didn't belong. David pushed through the crowd, cap tilted, gown flapping around his legs. He nearly stumbled in his hurry before he reached his father. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. Then David dropped his diploma, threw his arms around James, and held on tight. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I saw everything. I should have—" James pulled him in tighter, his voice low and steady. "No, son. You did exactly what you were meant to. You honored me in front of the world. That's more than I ever asked for." David pulled back, wiping at his eyes. "I just wanted them to see what I see." James cupped his son's face in his calloused hands. "They saw, son. Today, they saw." One of the SEALs stepped forward, the oldest of the 6, gray at his temples, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who'd led teams into fire. "Sergeant Carter," he said, nodding with respect. "We didn't know you'd be here, but when we saw those guards—" He paused, shaking his head. "We couldn't stand by. Men like you don't deserve silence. You deserve honor." James swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I was just here for my boy." The SEAL smiled faintly. "And that's what makes you a Marine through and through. Mission first, family always." The 6 of them extended their hands, one by one. James shook each, firm and steady, the grip of brothers forged by the same kind of fire. When the last hand fell away, the SEALs straightened. "You're not alone, Sergeant. Not today. Not ever." The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with streaks of orange and gold. Families packed up chairs, students laughed as they tossed their caps again, but the space around James and David felt sacred. Sarah approached quietly, tears still streaking her cheeks. She touched James's arm gently, her voice soft. "He needed you here, and so did I." James nodded, words failing him. For once, it didn't matter. David bent to pick up his diploma, then held it out toward his father. "This belongs to both of us," he said. James shook his head. "No, son. That's yours. You earned it." He paused, then added, "But I'll keep it safe until you need it." The boy smiled, pride glistening in his eyes. As they turned to leave the field, the 6 SEALs fell into step behind them. Not as bodyguards, not as protectors, but as brothers, witnesses to a moment that would be told and retold. Some in the crowd snapped photos. Others whispered about the Marine who had been asked to leave but stayed anyway. But for James, none of that mattered. What mattered was the weight of his son's arm over his shoulder, the diploma clutched tight, and the knowledge that in one powerful moment, dignity had silenced prejudice. Years later, people in Crestwood still talked about that graduation. Not about who gave the speeches or how hot the sun was that day, or even about the caps that flew into the air. They talked about the Marine in the bleachers, the father who stood tall against humiliation, the son who saluted him, the 6 SEALs who reminded a town what respect looked like. and they talked about the truth everyone learned that day. Honor is not given by permission. It is earned in sacrifice. And when it stands tall, no guard, no whisper, no prejudice can silence it.